Pleased to welcome Stephen Brint and Komi Frey, co-authors of the article, "The University of California Drifts Toward Conformism, the Challenges of Representation and the Climate for Academic Freedom in the Country's Greatest Public Research University." My next article title I will outsource to you. I love your titles, so when I write one, mine are so boring. All right, Stephen Brint is a distinguished professor of sociology and public policy at the University of California, Riverside, director of the Colleges and Universities 2000 project, and also he is at Berkeley at the Center for Studies in Higher Education. He's a proud graduate of UC Berkeley, telling you good stories, go Bears, where he began his relationship with CSHE. His research focused on the sociology of higher education, sociology of professions, and middle-class politics. The author of 4 books, over 60 journal articles and book chapters, and his most recent book is 2 Cheers for Higher Education, which won memorable mention for the American Sociological Pierre Bordeaux Award in 2019, and was also co-recipient of the Emory Elliott Book Prize for 2019, and one of the top 10 books on higher education for 2019. And he will send you a free copy soon, so Berkeley's always not that high. All right, Dr. Komi Frey is the Director of Faculty Outreach at FIRE, also graduate of the UC system. She received her BA from UC Davis, went on to pursue her PhD in social psychology, where she was a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellow. I think you worked with Brint? Yes. And her research investigates the conflicting values that shape professors' views of policies aimed at promoting diversity, equality, and inclusion.
Equity.
Equity. I always get that wrong. I do better when it's spelled DEI. Diversity, inclusion, and equity. That's not a commentary. Her focus both then and now works to illuminate the importance of civil liberties in academia. So thank you. Without further ado, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for the introduction. So Komi and I are going to trade off, and the very first part of the talk is mine. So I think that all of you probably realize that we are in a period of uneasy peace on many university campuses. Those professors who profess the values of academic professionalism, including academic freedom, rationalist inquiry, a just meritocratic selection, are caught in the middle now between a progressive left whose interests in representation sometimes come into conflict with those values, and an insurgent right intent on restricting academic freedom and I think also rationalist inquiry using state power. Our talk today is going to look at these forces and also what people who are professing these values of academic professionalism can do in this environment. So that is our goal today. And I'm going to start with UC. Most of us are from the University of California. Komi and I don't agree about everything, but I think we both do see some troubling trends in the university. These are some of the things that, some policies that have been passed recently that we feel infringe on academics' autonomy and expertise to make decisions about the future of the professoriate. The first is, and maybe the most radical, is the use of diversity statements to winnow the fields of applicants for faculty positions. This has not been used in every department, not every campus, but has been used in an experimental way, on several campuses, including Berkeley and including my own. And we see that when it is used, there is a radical change from the demographics of the applicant pool every step along the way. So in other words, research and teaching statements are not looked at until later in the process in these cases. We also have the presidential postdocs fellowships where a group of faculty, I presume, and maybe some administrators as well, choose candidates that they then put together in a list, and the campuses can hire them. We don't know who's choosing these people. We don't know what criteria they're using. We don't know how many excellent candidates have not been chosen. And many deans, or at least some deans, are now saying the only way you can hire is through these presidential postdocs. So that's another. We have seen some curriculum projects to try to increase the DEI emphasis in courses. That there was one on the Berkeley campus, as a matter of fact. And then unsigned departmental statements on political matters that where if you have a minority view, you're encapsulated within the department position on these political issues. And then some trainings also that some people consider to be increasingly rigid and to infringe on the autonomy of faculty to make decisions about candidates. So we do feel that the first part of this talk is partly about DEI offices, and then saw that in the subtitle. We do think that DEI offices, at least I think, they serve some legitimate purposes. As we say up here, that nationally there are about 800 hate crimes reported a year, mostly against racial ethnic minorities. A fairly sizable chunk of people feel that the campus is an unwelcome environment, and that chunk is higher among minorities. There are things, I believe, such things as implicit bias, microaggressions, other kinds of wounding behavior that we should be sensitive to for sure. And of course, underrepresentation, partly a pipeline problem, but there is a lot of underrepresentation in many fields, in many institutions, many opportunities on campus. And so I have never felt that these offices should, as they feel informed, should be shut and closed. But, and this is just some of the things that the typical DEI office does, okay? And some of them I think are entirely appropriate. Some of them probably do infringe on what should be the prerogatives of the faculty. So here are the problems with these offices. First of all, some of them have grown very large, as you can see up there. And indeed, by one count at least, there are 86 DEI staff on the Berkeley campus. Not the highest. Michigan is twice as many. But this is, I believe that I believe it's something like 3 or 4 times as many DEI staff as professors of history. Yeah, it's coming up, that's right. The people in the offices do tend to have the same kind of single-minded ideology about what they're doing. There's not much difference in the views of people who staff these offices. Also, it's the case that there's little rigorous assessment. Are they really making a difference? Are they improving the climate? Do people from racial ethnic minorities feel more welcome on campus, better represented when there's larger staff? Those kinds of studies are not done. And I think probably the biggest problem is that they are also responsible for academic freedom, typically. There are no separate academic freedom offices in universities, and it usually falls to the DEI office to balance academic freedom concerns and DEI concerns, which I think could be considered a conflict of interest, at least in the cases when they're maybe mutually supportive, but in some cases they probably come into conflict, or we know they come into conflict. I want to say that there are many offices on university campuses that are half-blown and do a poor job of assessing their impact. And so it is not the case that this is a unique problem to DEI offices. But some of these other things may be, really quite serious. And at some level, the size of the offices maybe does get to be a pretty significant problem. Sure, please.
Actually, introduce me to slide.
No,
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm one slide ahead of you now.
okay, you want me to move it ahead?
Yes.
Okay. So you are up next,
Oh,
actually.
there's the slide about DEI offices vary in orientation but perform similar functions.
I skipped over that pretty quickly.
Okay.
You wanna say something
there were a
about
couple
that?
things I want to have, if you don't mind.
Please, we'll go back to it.
Thank you. Yes, so with regard to the functions of bias reporting system oversight, DEI statement evaluation, curriculum advising, hiring interventions, and DEI trainings, there was a 2017 report by FIRE which found that many public universities across the country use very broad definitions of bias incidents and invite reports on political speech to be reviewed not only by administrators but often by law enforcement as well. Even though much of the things that are reported are constitutionally protected forms of expression, this is the case at UC Berkeley as well. So the University of California system, their bias reporting system is called the System-Wide Intolerance Report Form. This allows anyone to anonymously report expressions of bias which are defined as a general communication not directed toward a particular individual which disparages a group of people on the basis of some characteristic. Extremely broad definition right there. In addition to there being some concerns about anonymous reporting and the difficulty verifying the details when that's the case. In terms of DEI statements, so we have the UC Berkeley Office of Faculty Equity and Welfare, which some of you may be familiar with. They're managed by 6 administrators, none of whom are faculty. They are the ones who developed what's called the rubric for assessing candidate contributions to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And that was been adopted not only by UC Berkeley, but by universities across the country. In terms of diversity, let's see. Actually, in terms of that same rubric, a low score is assigned to, the lowest score actually is assigned to anyone who does not describe diversity in terms of race and ethnicity. The lowest score is also assigned to anyone who aspires to, quote unquote, treat everyone the same. And then when it comes to these other things like hiring, promotion, and training, all of that is overseen by UC Berkeley's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Belonging, and Justice Division. That's overseen by 18 administrators, none of whom are faculty.
And is that all what's in the report that you just mentioned that came out a couple of years ago?
No, that's just through searching
That's-
UC Berkeley's website.
Thank you.
Yeah, but if you're interested in the FIRE report, you can just Google search 2017 FIRE bias reporting systems. And also, I'm happy to share, I want to speak for you too, but I'm happy to share at least my slides, which include links to everything I'm referencing.
That'd be great.
You're up.
Oh, okay. So these findings are based on a study of 65 universities that are members of the 5 Power Athletic Conferences. I want to zoom in on UC Berkeley, obviously. UC Cal has 86 DEI staff, ranking the university 4th out of 65 in terms of basically administrative load on the side. We have Cal's DEI staff more than quadrupling the number of staff who assist students with disabilities. These staff who assist students with disabilities are required by the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. They're required by law to exist. So these DEI staff, that more than quadruple, are not And then also Cal has 6.1 DEI staff per 100 faculty. That also places them 4th out of 65. Higher ranking means more DEI bloat, so not a good thing. At least according to me, I shouldn't speak for everyone. And lastly, Cal has 1.8 DEI staff for each history faculty member, 85 DEI staff and 49 history faculty. That's just kind of helpful because history faculty, given kind of what they do, and they're a core discipline you'd expect to be a powerful representation on campus. Here we have kind of fun graph. So basically, the reason I'm presenting this is that DEI reflects a very progressively political value system. So to understand the expansion of DEI, I think it might help to understand the increased liberalism of the academy over time. So here basically we have a 50-year longitudinal look at faculty political orientation using data collected from 1989 to 2017 by UCLA's HERI, Higher Education Research Institute, as well as the Carnegie Foundation. That's the data from 1969 to 1984. That's what we can put that there. Basically, as you can see, the graph reveals a massive political left skew, diminishing proportion of conservative faculty over time. Specifically, liberal faculty have increased from 40.6% to 48.3% between 1968 and 2017. There's a slight dip in the middle. Far left faculty have more than doubled, from 4.8 to 11.5. Conservatives have dropped from 24.9 to 11.7. Far right have dipped slightly from 2.6 to 0.4%. And so before proceeding, I do want to emphasize that this is something where Steve and I disagree. This is one topic on which we disagree. So, he's my advisor, I always will. Oh, yes, sorry, go ahead.
I don't know how the data was collected, but does it take into account that the calibration of those categories has probably also shifted over time?
Well, so here their questions have been, to my knowledge, identical over time because it's collected by the same organization over time. So they haven't changed. What could change is people's conceptions of their own political orientation relative to others.
That's what I know.
That we can't control.
It's hard to
for,
normalize for that.
That is interesting, especially because if you're in a more liberal environment, you might think of yourself as more moderate relative to them.
For example.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's a question over here.
Well, there is something strange about this series, and I don't belabor the point,
No.
but you see in the 79, 89, 90 area that kink between just two categories, conservatives and middle of the road, and all the other lines are sort of smooth and have long trends. What explains that? I don't necessarily want to just divert us on that, but that's a very curious thing about this series.
It absolutely is.
Like there's like some kind of exogenous shock caused this. I don't, did
have-
Alan Bloom do this to us? I don't know. I mean,
We have some historians in here who may be able to better shed light on this than me because that is really interesting. I think it would be helpful to know what might have been happening in the nation, might have been happening in higher ed during that time, what books indeed may have come out during that time may have influenced. It is very interesting though. That's 1 year. It's definitely an anomaly.
But isn't that when Bloom's book came out, right?
yeah. No, I'm not entirely joking.
No.
Yeah.
Say that.
A single book can make a huge difference. Yeah. No, thank you for pointing that out. If anyone has any ideas, by all means, please do share them because lots of things we're still figuring out. But so I do want to emphasize that Steve and I disagree about basically the extent to which it's problematic that faculty are increasingly liberal. In my mind, increasingly ideologically homogenous, although that has kind of a negative connotation. Steve believes, and please correct me if I'm mistaken anything I'm conveying, but Steve believes that ideological homogeneity among faculty is not necessarily a problem. He believes it's only a problem if a significant portion of these faculty is not following professional norms. If they're not being engaged in scholarly discourse and not collecting and assessing evidence in a fair manner, those are circumstances in which he believes it's a problem. But otherwise, he doesn't believe it's something that we should all be kind of hand-wringing over. I, on the other hand, am more happy to hand-wring. Because I do believe that, I'm a social psychologist, and so I'm really interested in the biases people have. They're very subtle. And my concern is that if you have a group of faculty who are abiding by all professional norms, they still, because of their biases, completely unintentionally, they may be avoiding certain questions. They might, because they're not even looking at them. So there are a lot of hypotheses that go untested. And you have a group of people who share liberal or progressive value systems. So if we have, for example, a group of ideologically homogeneous right-wing individuals, everyone may start with a premise of, say, on abortion. Everyone agrees that abortion is a sin, it's murder. Everyone agrees that, so we can just have a discussion about, what restrictions are most appropriate. But everyone agrees on that central thing. And so if you have somebody on the left, you might say, well, wait a second, I might not actually be subscribing to that. If you don't have that person, you're going to have everyone have a certain level of consensus around something that's not shared by potentially most of the population. So we have that with a lot of views on the left as well that are not challenging the economy, and that's why this is concerning.
I guess the other thing I would say is that conservatives also don't necessarily have the scholarly mindset. Very often they are not looking at evidence in a dispassionate way. And simply having more conservatives on a faculty might not be a panacea, in that regard either. It really depends on if you have the academic scholarly mindset or not. So liberals can have it, conservatives can have it, moderates can have it, or they can not have it. So that's, I think, where we part company.
And definitely, if this is something people are interested in, we can go into more detail during the Q&A. Basically, is ideological homogeneity or faculty liberalism a problem? Why or why not? If it is, what solutions are feasible or might exacerbate the problem or have backfiring effects? So I do want to emphasize here one thing that combines kind of conversation about DEI with the conversation about faculty ideology. Liberals and conservatives basically have fundamentally different views about the importance of diversity or what forms of diversity are important. We see that this data comes from a sample of 1,861 tenure and tenure-track faculty at 185 public and 176 private universities across the country. When asked the importance of various types of diversity, liberal and conservative faculty differ most on their perceptions of the importance of racial ethnic diversity in their departments. Over 9 in 10, 92% of liberal faculty believe racial ethnic diversity is important, whereas just over half, 54% of conservative faculty feel this way. And also, am I speaking loudly enough and slowly enough? Okay, I'll speak up. I also talk a little too quickly sometimes, so please, I can slow down and speak up. I just kind of realizing that. Now, let's see. We are going to kind of zoom in on, as much as I've been a little bit hard on the political left, I want to acknowledge that partisanship is bipartisan, and political hostility is bipartisan. So from that same study I just described, here are the various contexts in which liberal, middle-of-the-road, and conservative faculty are willing to discriminate against colleagues of various political orientations in various academic contexts. So importantly, we see that there's bipartisan willingness to discriminate. The most dramatic number was that 45% of liberal faculty indicated that they would occasionally, to all the time, discriminate against a conservative job candidate, and 47% of conservative faculty said they'd do the same to a liberal job candidate. So it's kind of mutual willingness to discriminate, which is very unfortunate. And it does maybe lead us to something Steve was thinking about. If we were to have more conservative faculty, they could be faculty who are very liberal as well, and they could just want to discriminate the other direction, and that's definitely not the solution.
Could you clarify what the question was they were answering?
Oh,
Did
sure.
half of them really say, I'm willing to discriminate against a colleague on the basis of their
So
politics?
the prompt began with basically all these different settings, the conservative, the paper, liberal paper, conservative paper, higher, liberal higher, etc. All these were listed after the prompt. Please indicate your willingness to discriminate against the following types of colleagues in these settings, and then the scale ranged from never to all the time, and I believe it was 5-point Likert scale. Yeah, so it's very literally willingness to discriminate, and exactly in those contexts. Yeah, and not knowing anything else about the individuals.
Was this anonymous?
Yes. So faculty, there's no identifying information. We do know their demographic and academic characteristics. We don't know the university, we know their academic, their field and things like that, their age, but nothing about their identity, which might make them more honest.
Yeah.
Here we go. A study near and dear to my heart. This is my dissertation. So far I've been kind of describing liberals and conservatives as being diametrically opposed and somehow like these two groups that are at odds with each other. But within each group there is quite a bit of heterogeneity. Liberal faculty, for example, are not a monolith. That's why I discovered my dissertation research. So these are findings from a qualitative interview study of 55 faculty at a UC campus. The interviews lasted between 50 and 120 minutes and were conducted in 2019. I asked faculty whether they believe university faculty should embrace the following DEI efforts: microaggression awareness workshops, administering trigger warnings, having bias reporting systems, renaming buildings named after controversial figures, removing portraits that are overwhelmingly of white males, mandating DEI statements for faculty hiring, and considering the race and gender of applicants for faculty positions. I discovered that, as you can see from these numbers, faculty are fairly evenly divided about whether they believe these efforts do not go far enough. I label these faculty radically critical. Faculty believe these efforts are appropriate. I label these faculty supportive. Faculty believe these efforts are complicated. I label these faculty ambivalent. And those who believe these efforts go too far, I label these faculty opposed. Essentially, their beliefs are shaped by how they evaluate two sets of potentially competing values. The progressive political values that kind of encapsulate DEI, social justice, anti-racism on the one hand, and the more traditional academic values or academic professional values of academic freedom, free speech, and the pursuit of truth on the other. And so we have basically that the radically critical professors, they believe that DEI, progressive values especially, conflict with traditional values, and that progressive values supersede traditional values. The supportive faculty do not believe there's a conflict between progressive and traditional values. They believe that they can diffuse any contradictions. These are people who tend to be more kind of administrators, peacekeepers, ambivalent negotiators. I'm very pragmatic. They speak in very kind of political language, which is not, I don't mean that in a bad way. They're very good at kind of keeping peace.
Sorry, I have a quick clarifying question.
Yes.
Which departments fall within soft versus hard social sciences?
Oh,
Careful.
which fields?
Yeah.
Actually, I don't have the whole list with me, but I can pull that up very, very shortly after this. I do have a full list here. I'm sorry. Thank you. Good point. And also, I do not mean to offend anyone with the reference to soft sciences as being in some way harder than hard science. But yeah, no, it's important to specify what those sciences are. So thank you.
Sorry, does the categorizations mean that, for supportive, that most of the supportive faculty were in humanities and arts, or I'm not sure I
Yeah.
understand how to parse this table.
Yeah, of course. I wanted to include as much as possible without it being too overwhelming. For example, with regard to the discipline, that means that the highest number of those faculty came from that department. And because we're dealing with small n's for each of these groups, I didn't even want to make too much of the 16, 13, 13, except for to show they're pretty evenly divided. When you have such a small sample size, it's hard to kind of like identify, on the basis of these numbers. You can't run really statistical analysis to look at what's
And they're not
different.
random either, they're people who agree to
Yeah.
be interviewed.
Yeah, and so at a certain point it becomes almost like easy to identify these faculty if you know all these characteristics about them. So it just means that among these different four groups, you find more people of this, say, age, of this, categorization.
It's the largest plurality.
Exactly. Yes. And so we have supportive faculty believe there's no conflict between these value systems. The ambivalent faculty believe that there is a conflict between progressive values and traditional values, but they think it's complicated. They don't want to be in a position to have to decide. They're glad. They don't think there's any easy solution. They're glad they're not in a position to make those decisions. And then the opposed faculty believe that progressive values do conflict with traditional values, and they believe that traditional values supersede the progressive values.
So what was this thing? So I liked her dissertation research very much, and I decided we need to look at STEM faculty on the same campus. And I did the study a little bit differently. It's not just me, it's a couple of graduate students I worked with, Ben Fields and Megan Webb. We interviewed 47 science, engineering, medical faculty, and 10 of them were not classifiable, so we have 37 here that we were able to classify. And we asked them a series of questions about diversity, equity, inclusion, like should you give extra weight for race and gender in hiring and in graduate school student admissions, and should there be diversity statements, that sort of thing. We also asked a series of questions about anti-racism. Are terms like white supremacy used too loosely, like fragility? Should the police be banished from the campus? Should you not have grading during protest periods, and so on? And then we asked a bunch of questions about free speech. Should there be lists of microaggressions that people must avoid, and should there be bans on hate speech and that sort of thing? So the progressives were supportive of DEI, very supportive of DEI, supportive of anti-racism, skeptical of the free speech items. The traditionalists, just the reverse. Skeptical of some of the DEI items, very skeptical of the anti-racism items, and very supportive of free speech. And the bridging faculty, supportive of DEI, kind of arm's length from most of the anti-racism items, and supportive of free speech with some hesitations. These qualitative studies, although that you can't make any, you can't use statistical significance testing or anything like that, you can get a rich understanding of why people think the way they think. And these were very long interviews, both in Komi's case and mine, over an hour long typically. And so we were able to see why do they think the way they think. The progressives, an interesting thing was they felt very privileged. These were not people who were at the bottom of the social scale. They felt very privileged, and that it was the responsibility of privilege to do something to help people who weren't privileged. They also interpreted the public mission of the university almost strictly in terms of diversity. I mean, there were a lot of public missions of the university, reaching out to all the institutions in the state, creating leaders, and so on, but this was very much it. And they had read some of the anti-racist, a lot of them had read Kendi and D'Angelo and so forth, and had adopted the way of looking at the world. And these are STEM faculty. The traditionalists mostly were disappointed with what they saw as the declining quality of the campus and the declining commitment to academic excellence and its overcommitment to representation. Some of them were from European and other countries where they had experienced repressive regimes, and they were very much felt like they were in the same kind of, or getting to be in the same kind of environment. The most notable thing about the bridging faculty, these are the people kind of in the middle, was that a lot of them had administrative experience. A lot of them had been department chairs, associate deans, or divisional deans, or one of them had been the chair of the academic senate. And so they were used to balancing interests and trying to keep, they were really kind of I think, the main powers in STEM. And these other two groups are kind of the challengers. You might think of the traditionalists as, the powerful group, but I don't think in this campus that was true. So you can see that the statistics, they're not statistics, but the numbers vary. And on the on the humanities and social science side of the campus, many more people who are on the kind of the radical critics side. There were few of those in STEM, but there were quite a few people we call progressives. Okay, so
If you don't mind going back on one slide, only because I want to mention the fields.
let's see. This is,
So I just wanted to answer the question about, so the humanities, I coded as art, theater, music, history, English, philosophy, comparative literature, Hispanic studies, religion, writing. That's it. And then the soft social, anthropology, gender and sexuality studies, media and cultural studies, and ethnic studies. Let's see. Hard social, we have political science, sociology, psychology, and economics. And I can go through this. I know there's some reason why that wasn't a random decision on my part. I just had a reason why it was coded like that. And if anyone has any reasons for seeing it otherwise, I'm happy to kind of figure the findings on the basis of.
you're up
Are you
next.
Cool. Okay, so we have these data come from a national survey of 1,491 faculty at four-year colleges and universities in the U.S. This is regarding their attitudes toward free speech and academic freedom. The findings kind of provide a mixed picture on the state of academic freedom among American faculty. We see that on the positive side, the majority of faculty endorse very broad conceptions of free speech and academic freedom. They also reject harsh punishment of colleagues who engage in controversial expressions, and they oppose deplatforming of speakers on campus. And this is very refreshing. So this was a study by FIRE. We also have, FIRE has the college free speech rankings. That every year is the largest national study of college students' attitudes toward free speech. We found that pretty much across the board, faculty are more tolerant and more tolerant of controversial expression, more supportive of free speech compared to students. That was promising. But there is some serious cause for concern. So a majority of faculty worry about losing their jobs or reputations because someone misrepresents their words. And a third of faculty self-censor out of concern about the responses from staff, students, and administrators. So we've been talking a bit about diversity statements. That was one of the questions in the faculty survey. Faculty it's kind of crazy. They're evenly split about whether they believe mandatory diversity statements in faculty hiring are either a justifiable requirement for a university job or are political litmus tests that violates academic freedom. As you can imagine, there are huge political differences. So we have 75% of liberal faculty who support them or who believe they're justifiable, and 90% conservative and 58% moderate faculty who see them as political litmus tests. Here's another project very near and dear to my heart. I oversee this project. It's the Scholars in the FIRE database. I track all the attempts that have been made since 2000 to professionally sanction scholars for speech that is or would in public settings be protected by the First Amendment. And I say what would be because private universities are not beholden to the First Amendment, although many do have explicit statements supporting the rights of their students and faculty, and we at FIRE, we try to kind of hold their feet to the fire with regard to those statements when they infringe on students' rights. So we see from 2000 to 2022, there have been 1,080 attempts to sanction scholars. The annual number of attempts have increased from 4 in 2000 to 145 in 2022. The annual number of petitions calling for sanction has gone from 0 in 2000, with many years before in the 2000s being 0, to 33 in 2022, and in 2021 there are 75 petitions. Yes.
Can you say what you mean by sanction?
Yes, it's an excellent question. So I code a number of sanctions. The most benign, you could say, is investigations. And I say, and we definitely get criticism. Like if somebody's investigated and found innocent, how is that a sanction? Well, for many people who have undergone investigations, it's a very long, drawn-out process. Sometimes it can be pretty excruciating, and you can be assumed guilty by all of your colleagues until finally it's kind of vindicated. But even then, your reputation can be kind of tarnished. So we include that as the kind of most mild form of sanction. Most severe is termination. They're few in between, so we have also temporary suspension, paid or unpaid leave essentially. Censorship, so for example, if a paper of yours is retracted, something you do is kind of removed from like a faculty website or from something affiliated with actually your university association. We also code for if you are mandated to undergo some form of training as a consequence of your actions. And those are the main forms of sanction that I code.
Protected by the First Amendment or that's an extremely broad standard that includes statements that could be total egregious violations of professional norms, like for instance, lying in a scientific paper is protected by the First Amendment.
Yeah, and so.
And yet it don't bother me when somebody's university sanctions them.
Yeah,
That's their job.
that's very fair, and so it's tricky. So I like to have the definition be as broad as possible, just because it's a little bit, it gets tricky the more things that are protected by the First Amendment you try to say shouldn't be allowed. Although, so for example, plagiarism is protected by the First Amendment. I don't in the state of Blaze include plagiarism. I don't, when it comes to like papers that were retracted, I only include papers or books that were withdrawn from publication. I don't include those when there are allegations of fraud or actual, even though protected by the First Amendment, I don't include those. I include these demands when, for example, the author is accused of cultural appropriation. So when it's clearly ideological. In the past version, I used to say they were targeted for ideological reasons. Greg Lugoff, we've been having this discussion for many months. We kind of are leaning toward the more broad definitions because we at FIRE don't want to kind of adjudicate what's protected by the First Amendment, but still we think should be sanctions. That's why I use that term. But I still kind of use my own discretion, so I don't include overt deceit. Although I do code when the intent is malicious, when you're condoning or promoting violence. So insofar as it's not inciting immediate violence. So if somebody says, we have a professor who said, I hope all Trump supporters die before the election. That's included, completely constitutionally protected. They weren't saying that this person should die or how the person should die or when. Protected. Even if it's maybe unprofessional by some standards.
So now we're going to switch toward right at the end of the talk towards the pressure coming from the right. And this is the application of state power. We have seen an increase. Of course, this is mostly K-12, but we've seen an increase of, now we have 7 states that have passed legislation that restricts content in curriculum. In Florida, if they pass HB 999, no gender studies, no critical race theory, no intersectionality can't be used in a course description. Another 14 states have legislation pending, which could pass. There are 15, yes, there are 15 that are now have legislation to banish or eliminate DEI offices, diversity statements. And you can see the typical language there. One of the things, I think I say this in another slide, is the language of harm that is very common on the left. In other words, we can't say certain words because it harms people, right? They're bruised by it and made to feel unwelcome. That language has been taken over by the right as well. And I just got back from Florida. It was just interesting to see these Republican legislators talking about how the sensitivity of their students who are their constituents to hear divisive language like this, that they should be protected. And so it's something that is really happening. There's sometimes now also movements to promote intellectual diversity as opposed to demographic diversity and write that into law. Those states that are in the corner there are the ones that pass this legislation. An interesting part of this is that it's a pretty coordinated effort. There is the, now what does ALEC stand for? The American Legislative Exchange Commission, or Council. They convene conferences in which state legislators come and foundation people organize this. The Heritage Foundation, AEI, Chris Rufo was at Discovery, but is now at the Manhattan Institute. Important player in all of this, and especially important in Florida. They had a meeting in December 2020, and shortly thereafter, all this legislation that sounds extremely similar. All of it sounds very similar. Was rolled out across many, many states. Yes.
Who's Rufo?
He is, I would say, a conservative activist.
Donor? Big donor?
No, he's a young guy. He helps to shape these policies and to institutionalize them. He's now on the board of New College in Florida. It's kind of was placed there by Governor Ron DeSantis on that board. But he has been an advisor to DeSantis, and I think in many other places as well, to try to move the ball forward on this kind of legislation. Important name to know, actually, because he's a very important figure. Also has been very important in the popular parental rights in education, in K-12 education.
His power is because of eyeballs?
His power is the power of ideas that becomes policy. And policy is coercive if it's written in the law. So okay, now we have, there were quite a few legislators, and many of those legislators at this meeting sponsored legislation in their states. There are others, groups involved as well. There's the Claremont Institute and others that are involved in some of this legislation. So this is the kind of the academic freedom nightmare on the right, quote unquote, Florida law, HB 999. You can see some of the things that it does. It bans certain kinds of programs. It bans the use of DEI statements, critical race theory, any political identity filter. Boards of trustees are responsible for hiring faculty. Now that may be nominally true also in the University of California, for example, but it's very nominal. It's the departments that really are the moving forces. One gets the feeling in Florida that they are actually trying to transfer power over the hiring of faculty. So there's also post-tenure review after 5 years, and you can be fired for cause. Those causes are often pretty vague. So this is, from my point of view, a very showy type of legislation. If you are a defender of academic freedom, if you believe that the faculty are the experts and they are the ones who ultimately, there may be some good things about critical race theory, there may be some really bad things about it. They're the ones who have to ultimately debate, discuss, accept what's useful, and criticize mercilessly things that aren't useful. So to have the state do this is, has proven to be problematic in many countries outside of the United States, and probably will prove to be problematic in the United States as well. But conservatives really feel like the campus is a lost cause. Their view is the campus is a lost cause. The progressive, ideologically oriented people have taken over, and that kind of debate and discussion and evaluating theories is not happening. And so they're maybe in their feeling of desperation are putting together this kind of literature, this kind of legislation. Some people feel that what's happening in the liberal campuses is what's spurring these states to do these kinds of things. I'm skeptical of that. I think that there has been an effort to mobilize backlash going way back. First it was about political correctness, now it's about wokeness, but it's the same underlying kind of mobilization tactic. And it would not work unless there were a lot of people out there who were receptive to that mobilization tactic. The difference maybe now is that there's a lot of coordination. There's the use of state power as an instrument to control content, and a bigger constituency supporting it in these conservative states, thanks to Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis and others. And so I mentioned this language of harm, so I don't need to go through that, but really the proponents of the new laws often sound like snowflakes. That's a term that's used to criticize the left. They really do. They sound like they can't stand anything that could make them feel any kind of discomfort.
Very easy triggered.
Yeah, but it also suggests to me that language of harm is kind of a political dead end, and maybe is also, in my view, a psychological dead end as well. Okay, so just briefly, the blue states sometimes use state power too, and California has used state power to prevent travel to states whose LGBTQ policies the state does not agree with. Now there are 23 states on that list. That's a kind of boycott, I would say. It certainly limits academic discourse and also sports students cannot travel either. There is new legislation pending to get rid of that law, and we'll see what happens. Okay, now we're very near the end. I probably talked too long, but we have just a couple more slides. So we want to talk about the court rulings that support academic freedom, and because that will play into the very end of our talk.
Yeah, and overall the court rulings do paint a pretty hopeful picture with the exception where you can see of Garcetti. So in Sweezy versus New Hampshire, 1967, the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional for State Attorney General to have inquired into Professor Paul Sweezy's alleged association with the Communist Party. Chief Justice Earl Warren stated that, quote unquote, to impose any straitjacket upon the intellectual leaders in our colleges and universities would imperil the future of the nation. Very strong statement. Next we have, in horrible pronunciation, in Kavician versus Board of Regents, 1967, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a loyalty oath requirement imposed on faculty at colleges and universities in New York. Justice William Brennan described academic freedom as, quote unquote, special concern of the First Amendment, which does not tolerate laws that cast a pall of orthodoxy over the classroom. Another really great justice statement. In Garcetti versus Civic, 2006, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that public employees have no First Amendment protection when they engage in official job-related speech. But Justice David Soter, in his dissenting opinion, warned that the majority's decision would, quote unquote, imperil academic freedom in public colleges and universities whose teachers necessarily speak and write pursuant to official duties. Very wise dissent. In Adams versus Trustees of the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, 2011, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit determined that Garcetti did not apply to Professor Mike Adams' case because speech was related to his teaching and scholarship, which exists outside the traditional public employment context. That was very important. In Detmers, and also Mike Adams is one of the most famous, horrifying cases of academic freedom in history. His case actually ended with suicide a few years back. He was very involved with fire. So if anyone's curious about the story of Mike Adams, Mike Adams, UNC Williamson, just typed out a complaint all about what happened with him. In Demers versus Austin, 2014, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit ruled that, quote unquote, if applied to teaching and academic freedom, Garcetti would directly conflict with the important First Amendment values previously articulated by the Supreme Court. So we're seeing gradually, basically the overturning or disillusion of Garcetti. In Buchanan versus Alexander, 2019, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit recognized an academic freedom exception in Garcetti, citing the Supreme Court's quote-unquote Hall of Orthodoxy language from Kaviciu. And lastly, in Merriweather versus Hartrup, 2001, most recently, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit held that, quote-unquote, simply put, professors at public universities retain First Amendment protections, at least when engaged in core academic restrictions, core academic functions, such as teaching and scholarship. So very promising for those of us at public universities.
So have these been appealed further to the Supreme Court?
What was that?
Have these not been appealed to the Supreme Court? These are all Court of Appeals, right?
Yeah, well, the Sweezy versus New Hampshire was the U.S. Supreme Court. Kavician versus Board of Regents was also Supreme Court. Garcetti versus Calabasas, Supreme Court. And the rest of them have been Court of Appeals.
But are they currently under appeal, do you know?
I don't know. That's a good question, though. I'll get back to you about that. Yeah.
Okay, last, our concluding slide, given what we have said about the challenges to academic freedom and other values of academic professionalism that come from the left and also come from the right, the different challenges from the right written into law, how should academics respond? And with respect to the climate for discourse on campus, the isolated person who dissents really has little power and is likely to feel just frustrated and alienated. So our prescription, or at least my prescription, is organization. If you don't like what's happening on campus, organize in groups. And it's very, to me, it's encouraging that now we have national organizations like FIRE, like Heterodox Academy, like AFA. We also have campus organizations. We have alumni groups. We have seminars like this one where these issues are talked about and discussed, and where people see that they're like-minded folks who are worried about some of these tendencies. So stronger voices can come from organizations, stronger networks, and so forth, and more sense of confidence. With respect to the state law, that's another story. And as we saw, the courts have been probably the best friends in relation to laws that attempt to restrict content or academic freedom in various ways. Generally speaking, they have had robust protections except for Garcetti, especially in public universities. I think it's also I've asked whether HB 999 is possibly going to be held up in the courts, and the likely answer is yes. It will be. It's already there's already been an injunction against some of the Florida laws. The so-called Stop Work Act, as it applies to higher ed. Protest, I think, also tells the courts that people care about these issues, and so there's a lot of protest in Florida now. I think that doesn't hurt. If you feel that the faculty are the ones who have expertise, and the faculty really have to take the responsibility for the system of knowledge as it develops, and for criticism, and for accepting things based on their best judgment. All of these tendencies are problematic, and these, we think, are the ways to contend with them. Thank you.
So I'm sure that Daniel will manage the questions.
Absolutely. Looks like we have a first